Welcome to the SBI Podcast, offering CEOs, sales and marketing leaders ideas to make the number.
Welcome to the SBI Podcast, a weekly broadcast dedicated to helping you make your number, but getting your peers to share with you how they are making theirs. Today we're going to demonstrate how to secure and retain the right talent for a transformation. So why this topic today? The revenue growth objective during a transformation is heavily dependent on having superstar executive talent. At times, the revenue growth strategy calls for a new set of competencies that the existing team does not possess. And if you mismatch talent and strategy, you can suffer from significant execution problems. My name's Greg Alexander. I'm the CEO of SBI, and I am your host. And helping me today with our demonstration is an executive who knows a thing or two about this topic. His name is Sean O'Brien. Sean, welcome to the show.
Hey, good morning, Greg. Thanks for having me on the program.
Great. And for the benefit of the audience, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. My name is Sean O'Brien. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer here at PGI. I've been with the company now going on 14 years. I came out of a finance background. I spent just over a decade in the investment banking and hedge fund management space before joining PGI.
And what does PGI do?
We're a global leader in collaboration software and services. And so anytime that you need to connect with people that you're not present with, whether it's on the telephone or via mobile device or computer, we're the glue that makes that happen.
Okay. And Chief Administrative Officer, So what does that entail?
Yeah, I had to actually Google that title when they first introduced it to me. So a CAO is really simply a senior executive that's responsible for oversight of two or more functional areas within an organization. In my case, I run our global corporate development practice. I also look after HR, legal, our global facilities program, as well as our strategic program management office. Okay,
perfect. All right, I just wanted to, obviously I know what PGI does. You guys are a client of ours, and I just wanted to make sure the audience knew and establish what a CAO does, which is a title I'm seeing more and more of. So.
Oh, is that right? Okay,
yeah,
cool.
Yeah. All right, so we're talking about talent as a company goes through a transformation. So let's jump into our questions. So Sean, as a company goes through a transformation from one business model to another, how do you determine if you have the right executive team in place?
That's a great question, Greg. I think when a company's going through a significant transformation, especially in its core business model, in many ways you really have to step back and take a fresh look at your executives like you're looking at them for the first time and really evaluate the teams. Because, the fact of the matter is, in many cases, the talents, the skills, the people that were responsible for getting you to where you are today are not necessarily the ones that are going to take you forward into the future most effectively. And so when we look at our executives, you also want to really give it some context. So you want to look at your market, look at your company, ask yourself questions like what stage of development is your organization? How is the organization performing against its financial and strategic goals and objectives? What are your current challenges? What does the market look like? Are there new competitive threats that you're facing? And the answer to those questions will help you determine a lot about your executives. Whether you need, if you're more established and successful, you might not need that sort of, change agent type executive that you might need if you're caught, with some challenges in your organizational structure, or if you're caught in a market that's got some new competitive threats. And so for me, it's an opportunity to reassess and reestablish that you have the right people in the right roles to take your company through that critical transformation.
Okay. And if we assume that this analysis reveals some changes that are needed, how do you determine if you should hire to or train to close the gap?
That decision really hinges on a couple of factors. Really, what it gets down to for me, Greg, is it's really a build or buy decision. And when I'm looking at it, it's you have to identify, is it a deficiency in their skill sets, or maybe a specific, professional experience that they're lacking. If that's the case, you may want to invest in training to fill that gap. But if the deficiency is elsewhere, like just in their general experience, or even more to the point, if it's a work style or a mindset, you may want to consider going outside, because it may be more cost-effective and time-effective to go out and source a new executive for that role. The one thing that you need to keep in mind, it's important to always understand when you're talking about executives, it becomes really a matter of opportunity cost. There's a cultural impact. There's, the tone from the top is so critically important when you're going through a transformation. And these are highly paid individuals. Taking them out of the market, taking them out of their job to do skills-based training and things like that has a cost that's very real to the organization. And so taking a candid and a fulsome look at exactly what is that skills gap and how realistic is it to bridge it is going to be a key determinant of whether it's easier to build or to buy that executive talent.
So I love framing that up in a build versus buy, dimensionalizing that around opportunity cost and seeing what's the most cost and time effective, which takes me into my next question, which is, this concept of the culture and the impact on the culture. So how do you get the company's leadership team comfortable with the disruption a change like this might cause?
Well, it really starts with a hard look and basically an honest assessment of what the potential pitfalls are. From my experience, there's never a perfect answer. Whenever you're bringing in a new dynamic, in whether it's a new person altogether or a person transitioning into a new role, it's going to be imperfect, because you're dealing with, at the extreme end, you may be dealing with siloed organizations or turf battles or things like that, or you're just dealing with the fact that when people are involved, it gets complicated, because most people are naturally reluctant to change. And so the more time you spend up front trying to foresee some of those potential pitfalls and to work a plan around it, I think the better off you're going to be. In our case, I'll give you an example. A couple of years back, we were looking at adding a new senior executive, chief information officer. And they were going to be hired into a role that previously didn't exist here at PGI, which was going to potentially be problematic for people who had been in various functions across our company for many years. And the biggest consideration there was the potential cultural friction, to your point, of bringing in the new person. In our case, the timing worked out well that we were able to sort of do a try it before you buy it. And we were able to engage this gentleman in a consulting role in advance of actually offering him a full-time job, which gave him an opportunity to get socialized, to get used to our climate and our culture. And by the time that we actually were ready to offer him a full-time position, the teams that ultimately were going to roll up to him really understood the caliber of person they were working with, and the cultural impact was minimal. The last thing I'll say before I forget is I cannot overestimate the importance of communication. And that communication element, giving the context to the rest of the leadership team, to the rest of the company, of why now, why this role, why this individual person is going to be so important. Because if you get in front of your people early and often, by emails, by town hall meetings, whatever it is, and help them put the pieces together to really understand the business rationale, the strategic rationale of why this change is being made, I think you're going to find yourself with a much less disruptive impact of bringing someone on the team.
Yeah, I agree with you. So over-communicate, and you're right, that can't be emphasized enough here, especially if you're worried about this disruption, and bringing in a new executive or a new executive team during a transformation is highly disruptive. So explaining why now, why this person, why this role, et cetera, is a very key thing. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. During the break, I want you to think about the 3 questions I just asked Sean. Do you know the answers? Do you like the answers? If not, I think we can help you. Consider having one of our experts spend some time with you in a workshop. To get a feel for what is covered in the workshop, go to sbi.tips/2017 workbook and download a copy of the workbook that we use in this session. If you're watching this video broadcast, here is that workbook, and you can see it's a beast. And it's got lots and lots of exercises in it that helps you think through making a executive leadership change while you're going through a transformation. So that's what we're talking about today. We got 2 more segments. This is the SBI podcast, and we'll be back in a bit.
Meet Bruce. He's CMO for a pharma company in the Midwest. Every Saturday morning, he heads to his favorite coffee shop to watch SBI TV.
Dedicated to helping you make your number.
It's how he keeps on top of trends and learns about emerging best practices direct from top marketing leaders.
You don't want to be marching up the hill and look behind and no one is following.
For Bruce, it provides the jolt of inspiration he needs to stay on top of his game. That, along with his venti triple shot half-sweet non-fat soy hazelnut macchiato extra whip. How do you SBI? Take it to the next level with an SBI workshop. Learn more at howdoyousbi.com.
Welcome back. You're listening to the SBI podcast. I'm your host, Greg Alexander, and today's guest is Sean O'Brien, Chief Administrative Officer from PGI. Today we are demonstrating how to secure and retain the right talent for a transformation. So we're going to jump back into the questions. So Sean, let's pick up where we left from the previous segment. And how long does it take to fill an open executive position?
Well, Greg, it really depends. For us, we've been super fortunate recently over the last few years. We haven't had to go out and do, an exhaustive 9 to 12 month search. But it has happened to us in the past. And so, sometimes you just, things align. Someone in your network or through, a recruiting option comes forward that has the exact experience and skills, for the role that's at hand. Other times it can be more burdensome. The thing that I always try to focus on is it's much more important to fill the spot with the right person than it is to just get it filled. Because while there's a cost to vacancy in the senior leadership role, there's a very real cost to making a misstep. So it's important to be acting with urgency, but not hastefully in your decision.
Yep. And when you source candidates, do you do it yourself? Do you use executive recruiters? What's your preference?
Well, we've really successfully done both in the past. We tend to lean more on our own networks than on recruiters. I think, when you talked earlier about the cultural impact, the cultural fit's so important, and the more that you can lean on your own individual networks to identify people through personal and professional relationships, I think that's a great starting point to making sure that it's cultural fit. But at the same time, we've been very fortunate over the years working with, a small set of executive recruiters that know us well, know our culture, and know what it's going to take to, be successful in a role at PGI. And so it's really been both for us.
Yeah. So let's talk about working with executive recruiters, because that's something that our clients do a lot. So from your perspective, what works well when working with these executive recruiters, and what does not work so well? And what advice would you give the audience in this regard?
Well, I think you hit it nail on the head. There's positives and negatives. And I think the positives are clearly executive recruiters. They can be very niche focused. And so you can find a recruiter who specializes, I bet you, in exactly for us, let's say a SaaS, technology executive. You can get that level of granularity, which can save you a lot of time when you're trying to source, a very specific need within your organization. And their networks, especially at the C-level, they're considerable, and their job is to keep them constantly refreshed. And so for a company like ours as PGI, one of the things that recruiters have helped us do is tell the story, because we're not necessarily a household brand. And while we're very well known in our industry when it comes to recruiting talent from outside, which we've looked to do as we've gone through, a transformation, they've helped us get, candidates interested in the role. Now, the challenges, to the other side of your question, the biggest challenge is nailing that cultural fit. And, culture is something that's literally, it's impossible to really quantify or to express. You have to be inside the organization, I believe, to fully understand it, because it's really nuanced. And you can't, as an outside agent, really speak with the same passion and level of understanding of how the people come together with the products and the process to make, whatever special or unique about your culture, make that accurately and adequately convey to the candidate. And so, a recruiter will never be as good at telling your story as an internal resource will be. But again, they bring so much value that for the right search, we will look to engage them accordingly.
Yeah. So you mentioned cultural fit being super important, and telling the story is a big value add that a recruiter can do for you. Does that mean that you tend to use the same recruiter because at some point they really know you, they know your culture, and they really know the story? Or is it better to maybe have multiple relationships with a variety of different recruiters?
We do tend to go back to the same recruiters for the very reason you mentioned. For us, it's the more they understand us and who we are as an organization, what it's going to take to be a success, the better they are at doing their job. And that's more efficient for them, more efficient for us. But we have, especially as we've gone through this transformation in our own business model, we have opened up our network of executive recruiters as we've looked to, bring in new types of talent that just weren't even in our vernacular 2 or 3 or 4 years ago. And so we tend to lean on a few close partners in that regard, but we're also open to expanding beyond that as the need dictates.
And as a general rule of thumb, do you think it's best working with kind of the big mega recruiters because of their vast reach? Or do you think it's best working with kind of some of the smaller boutique recruiters?
Again, I hate to go back to an it depends answer, but it really depends.
Yeah.
For us, at the executive level, I think getting, a niche focus from the recruiter is critically important. And a lot of times that happens at the smaller boutique firms. For general recruitment efforts, clearly there are a lot of benefits for a global company like ours to have a global partner that has scale and cast a very wide net. And so I think it depends. In the executive side, it tends to be the more specialist, niche focused firms that we tend to default to. Okay,
very good. All right, so we're demonstrating today how to secure and retain the right talent during a business transformation. We're talking to Sean O'Brien from PGI. We're through 2 segments. We're going to take another break here, come back for segment 3. But before you come back, why don't you head over to Apple's App Store and download the SBI app. This allows you to get all of SBI's sales and marketing content, like this show, in a mobile-friendly way. Okay, we got one more segment with Sean after the break. We'll be back in a second.
Meet Chuck. He's the head of sales for a business services company. He stays on top of sales and marketing trends by listening to SBI podcasts on his morning commute.
The plan is to understand what your revenue target is.
Except on Tuesdays. That's when he jams out to 80s New Wave. On Wednesday, it's SBI all morning long, with more emerging best practices from the business world.
I'd say the biggest thing you need to avoid is leading without support.
Until Thursday. That's 90s Grunge Day. On Friday, it's back to business. That's when Chuck ends the week on a high note with more hits from SBI.
Sales is really straightforward. You make your number, you don't make your number.
Rock on, Chuck. How do you SBI? Get the most out of your SBI experience. Manage your account at howdoyousbi.com.
Welcome back, everybody. This is our last segment with Sean, demonstrating how to secure and retain the right talent during a business transformation. I'm going to jump back into our questions here. So, Sean, transformations can be difficult, to say the least. How do you make sure that the newly recruited executive does not quit early due to buyer's remorse?
Yeah, I mean, that is a great question. And for us, it's critically important that any new hire, in particular an executive, sticks. And I go back to an earlier answer. I think communications is going to be key to this part of the equation as well, Greg. Really letting the incoming executive, really understand very clearly the roles, the responsibilities, the expectations, the various success factors that are going to make this job a success. I think that's critically important, as is just full transparency. It's difficult enough bringing a new person into your company, but when you're going through a transformation, you really need to be full disclosure, warts and all, because once they get in, the cost of them not sticking is very, very high, and you really want to be extra careful. If you're in a position to do the try it before you buy it route that I just mentioned a minute ago with our CIO, that doesn't always align due to timing, doesn't always work out. But if you're in a position where you can have that walk before you run approach, we found a lot of success in that regard as well.
Yeah. If doable, that is definitely
doable.
De-risking way to do this. Okay, very good. All right, describe for me how you onboard a executive.
Yeah, for us, there's not really a one-size-fits-all approach. I'll tell you, recently we've launched a program that has been very successful for us. We call it the high-touch executive orientation, where we basically take one of the people on my team, the HR professional, and we assign them to a new executive hire. And they basically handhold them through the entire process. Going through the logistics and all the paperwork and all the stuff involved with getting onboarded into the systems, working with them their first few days in the office to answer any questions, to help guide them internally to make sure that they're creating the linkages of who they need to be connecting with. And for us, we've had some mixed reviews, but they've been certainly weighted toward positive with this new one-on-one approach. Fortunately for us, we haven't had so many new executives come in that we haven't been able to give them that high level of personal touch. And so I would encourage any organization that has the bandwidth and the bench to follow that type of approach. I think they'll be very successful with it.
Yeah, very good advice. Sometimes we hire executives and we think they can onboard themselves, but when you're going through a transformation, there's a lot of information to consume. There's a lot of people to meet. There's a lot of new process to understand. And I love the high-touch executive orientation and the focus on one-to-one. That's a great recommendation. All right, one more question for you here. So when a change like this happens, there is a risk that the outgoing executive will take with him and her many valued employees. How do you make sure that you don't have a brain drain when a change like this occurs?
That's a really important question, Greg, and one that I've had some personal experience with here at PGI. Listen, anytime an executive departs, there's a risk. What we found is the nature of the executive's departure really plays a big role. For example, if they're retiring, we found that the risk is much less, especially if they're well-liked, well-admired. That can be a rallying point for their employees and the next level down to really carry on their vision or their legacy, so to speak. But if the executive is leaving for a role at a different firm, it gets trickier. And, clearly, in many states, you're allowed to have, NDAs, non-competes, things like that can put some contractual barriers between you and a brain drain. But what I've found is the most important tool you have to combat, employee exits is really, again, going back to communicating with them about the opportunity that comes with this executive's departure. What that means for their individual circumstances, their pay, their career pathing. Find whatever that warm blanket is to wrap around those employees, whether it's money, bigger opportunities, new incentives. In some cases, it may just be recognition and praise, but demonstrate to the employees that they're valued, that they have a critical role in the success of the business going forward, even with this executive's departure, and I think you're going to really minimize your risk.
Sean, that was a great demonstration on how to secure and retain the right talent during a business transformation. Thank you for sharing your approach with our audience.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me on the show, Greg.
All right, I want to thank the SBI audience for tuning in. Last month, we hit another milestone with our show in that we crossed over 50,000 downloads for a single episode. This kind of response encourages us to keep putting out the show. Thank you for your continued support. If you want to learn more about this topic or the other areas we focus on, go to salesbenchmarkindex.com/register and create an account. This allows you to personalize your experience with our content. For instance, you can choose the topics you're interested in and how often you want to learn about them. Okay, that's it for today. As always, until next time, I wish you good luck as you try and make your number.
This has been the SBI Podcast. For more information on SBI services, case studies, the SBI team and how we work, or to subscribe to our other offerings, please visit us at salesbenchmarkindex.com.